In Fairfield County, Connecticut, a 73-year-old widow was about to prove her family wrong about what acting her age really meant. What started as grief therapy in her backyard took a shocking turn when she discovered her extraordinary gardening talent. Elizabeth Thompson wasn't your typical retiree. For 45 years, she had balanced corporate books with mathematical precision, known for her methodical determination. When she planted forgotten Cherokee Purple tomato seeds, she had no idea she was cultivating a transformation that would catch Food Network's attention. What began as therapeutic soil tending would become a national inspiration, proving it's never too late to bloom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sympathy cards still formed neat stacks on Elizabeth Thompson's dining room table, their edges perfectly aligned like the quarterly reports she'd once filed with mathematical precision. 6 months since Robert's funeral, and she continued to organize them each morning, a ritual that gave structure to days that otherwise stretched like empty ledger sheets. Liz sat in the leather chair that had been Robert's domain for 47 years, surrounded by the methodical archaeology of their marriage. Banker's boxes lined the hardwood floor, each labeled in her careful handwriting. Tax documents 1975-2010. Insurance papers, Robert's personal items. The house held the sterile quiet of a library after closing, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock Robert had insisted was an investment. She lifted another stack of papers from his mahogany desk, the same desk where he'd balanced checkbooks and dismissed her gentle suggestions about starting a garden. "Elizabeth, you can barely keep houseplants alive," his voice echoed in her memory. "Stick to what you know, numbers don't wilt." Her fingers paused on a yellow sticky note attached to a seed catalog from 1998. In Robert's cramped handwriting, another waste of money, ease plant obsession. She turned the page carefully, seeing her own younger handwriting in the margins, excited notes about heirloom varieties and growing seasons, dreams she'd tucked away like this catalog itself. The catalog fell open to a dog-eared page featuring Cherokee Purple tomatoes. The description promised rich, smoky flavor with complex sweetness, a true gardener's reward. Someone had circled the variety in faded ink. Someone had dreamed of growing something beautiful. Liz's breath caught as she recognized her own handwriting. Below the circled variety, she'd written, "For the garden behind the oak tree, when Robert retires and we have time." Robert had never retired. The cancer diagnosis came 3 months after his 68th birthday, stealing their theoretical someday with the efficiency of a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. No time for gardens, no time for dreams that didn't fit in manila folders. She set the catalog aside and continued emptying drawers, finding Robert's systematic rejection of her interests documented in sticky notes and marginalia. Impractical. Too expensive. Elizabeth gets carried away. The evidence of his dismissal accumulated like compound interest, each small denial building into decades of deferred dreams. The bottom drawer stuck, warped from years of Connecticut humidity. When it finally surrendered, Liz found herself staring at a collection of seed packets she'd forgotten existed. Brandywine tomatoes, glass gem corn, dragon tongue beans, varieties she'd ordered in secret and hidden away, waiting for some day. Her accountant's mind calculated automatically. 15 years old, minimum. Well past viable germination dates. She should throw them away, add them to the growing pile of Robert's discarded possessions. Instead, she held up a packet of Cherokee Purple tomato seeds, the same variety from the catalog. The paper envelope felt fragile as parchment, but the seeds inside rattled with surprising weight. On the back, someone had written, "Spring 2009, in her own careful script. The handwriting of a woman still believing in future possibilities. Through the kitchen window, the backyard stretched like an abandoned stage set. The grass had grown wild during Robert's illness, when maintenance schedules had given way to chemotherapy appointments and sleepless nights. The old oak tree still stood, sentinel in the corner, its spreading branches creating the perfect canopy she'd once imagined for a garden. The phone's shrill ring cut through her reverie. "Mom?" Michael's voice carried the efficient concern of a Silicon Valley executive managing a problematic client. "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Michael. Just going through some of your father's things." "Good, good. Important to get organized. Have you thought about what we discussed?" The senior living community in Fairfield has excellent reviews. Independent living, but with support services. It might be time to consider. I'm 73, not 93. The words came out sharper than intended. I can still manage my own home. A pause. Michael's voice softened. "I know you can, Mom. I'm just worried about you being alone in that big house. Dad always took care of the practical stuff, the yard work, the maintenance." Liz looked out at the untamed lawn, at the flower beds choked with weeds. Robert had maintained their property with the same methodical precision he'd applied to their finances, keeping everything neat and controlled, and utterly without personality. "Maybe I'll hire a landscaper," she said, surprising herself. "That's a good idea. Keep it simple, though. Low maintenance. At your age, you don't want to take on big projects." At your age. The phrase settled over her like dust on unused furniture. When had she become someone whose age defined her capabilities? When had her son started speaking to her like she was already halfway to being incapable? "I should go, Michael. Thank you for calling." After hanging up, Liz sat in the growing afternoon shadows, holding the seed packet like a talisman. Through the window, the oak tree's branches swayed in the spring breeze, and she could almost see it, the garden she'd once planned. Raised beds in geometric precision, her accountant's mind applied to something living and creative. Tomato plants, heavy with purple fruit, their leaves releasing that distinctive earthy scent she remembered from her grandmother's garden in Ohio. Without allowing herself to think too carefully, she walked to the back door and stepped outside for the first time in months. The yard revealed itself like a neglected relationship, familiar but changed, full of possibilities Robert's rigid maintenance had never allowed. Weeds had conquered the pristine grass, but they'd brought wildflowers too. Dandelions blazed yellow against the green, and somewhere a robin sang with the liquid enthusiasm of early spring. Liz knelt beside the oak tree, her knees protesting against the unfamiliar position. The soil felt foreign under her fingers, gritty and rich and alive in a way that spreadsheets never were. She'd forgotten how earth smelled, how it seemed to pulse with quiet potential. Working with the instincts of her grandmother's genes, she cleared a small patch of ground. Each weed she pulled felt like removing a constraint, each handful of debris like clearing space for something new. The physical work awakened muscles she'd forgotten she possessed, and her accountant's precision found new purpose in creating straight lines and perfect spacing. She tore open the seed packet with ceremony, spilling the Cherokee Purple seeds into her palm. They looked impossibly small to contain the promise of fruit and flavor, but her grandmother had taught her that the most profound transformations often began with acts of faith barely visible to the naked eye. One by one, she pressed the seeds into the prepared soil, covering them with the careful attention she'd once reserved for balancing complex accounts. Each seed represented a small rebellion against Robert's practical dismissals, against Michael's age-related concerns, against the voice in her own head that whispered she was too old to start anything new. The late afternoon sun warmed her back as she worked, and for the first time since Robert's diagnosis, Liz felt something other than grief or emptiness. The soil beneath her fingers seemed to hum with quiet promise, and the act of planting connected her to something larger than her loss, to seasons and cycles and the eternal optimism of seeds that trust in tomorrow. She sat back on her heels, surveying her small achievement. 6 inches of cleared earth, 8 seeds planted with mathematical precision. It wasn't much by any measure except the one that mattered most. It was hers. A choice made not from obligation or others' expectations, but from the dormant part of herself that still believed in growth. As the sun set behind the oak tree, painting the sky in shades of possibility, Liz brushed the soil from her hands and smiled for the first time in months. Somewhere beneath the earth, her Cherokee Purple seeds lay waiting for tomorrow's sun, and in her chest, something equally patient began to stir. 3 weeks had passed since Liz first pressed those Cherokee Purple seeds into the Connecticut soil, and each morning brought the ritual of checking for signs of life. She approached the small patch of earth with the same methodical precision that had once governed her quarterly reports. But now her ledger was written in emerging green shoots that defied every spreadsheet she'd ever balanced. The tomato seedlings had sprouted with surprising vigor, their cotyledon leaves unfurling like tiny green flags of victory. Liz knelt beside them each dawn, coffee mug in hand, marveling at how something so small could carry such weight of possibility. Her accountant's mind calculated growth rates and projected harvest dates, but beneath the numbers lay something she hadn't felt in decades: pure, uncomplicated joy. The success of those first seeds had awakened something dormant in her chest, a hunger for knowledge that surprised her with its intensity. She found herself researching soil composition with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to tax codes, discovering a world of pH levels and nitrogen ratios that spoke to her analytical nature, while promising results far more beautiful than any financial statement. Which was how she found herself standing outside Rodriguez Farm Supply on a Tuesday morning, studying the weathered storefront with the nervous anticipation of a first-day employee. The building squatted between a hardware store and a diner, its parking lot scattered with pickup trucks and the occasional sedan that suggested she wouldn't be the only non-farmer venturing inside. The bell above the door announced her entry, with a cheerful clang, and Liz paused just inside the threshold, overwhelmed by the sensory assault of her new world. The air hung thick with the earthy scent of potting soil and the green smell of growing things. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, loaded with seed packets, fertilizers, and tools whose purposes she could only guess at. First time in? The voice belonged to a compact man in his 40s, his dark hair showing threads of silver, and his hands bearing the permanent soil stains of someone who lived his work. His name tag read Tommy Rodriguez, owner, and his smile carried the genuine warmth of someone who'd found his calling. "Is it that obvious?" Liz asked, managing a self-conscious laugh. "Not obvious, just excited. That's the look people get when they discover this world for the first time." Tommy's eyes crinkled with understanding. "What kind of growing are you thinking about?" Liz described her modest tomato success with the measured precision of presenting quarterly earnings, but Tommy listened with the focused attention of someone who recognized passion beneath professional restraint. When she mentioned the Cherokee Purples, his eyebrows rose with genuine respect. "Heirloom varieties?" He nodded approvingly. "Most people start with hybrids from the garden center. You've got good instincts." He led her toward a rotating display of seed packets. "How big are you thinking of going?" The question hung between them like a challenge. How big was she thinking of going? 3 weeks ago, she'd been a widow organizing sympathy cards. Now she stood surrounded by possibilities she'd never imagined, her mind already calculating space and soil requirements with the efficiency of compound interest. "Bigger than my late husband would have approved of," she heard herself say, surprising them both. Tommy's laugh was warm and conspiratorial. "The best gardens usually are. Let me show you something special." He guided her to a corner where packets of exotic varieties hung like promises. Glass gem corn with kernels that looked like stained glass windows, dragon tongue beans striped in purple and cream, cosmic purple carrots that defied everything. She thought she knew about vegetables. Each packet told a story of gardeners who'd refused to accept that orange carrots and yellow corn were the only possibilities. "These aren't your grocery store varieties," Tommy explained, his voice carrying the reverence of someone sharing sacred knowledge. "They take more attention, more patience. But the flavors, He shook his head. There's no comparison. Liz studied the packets with the same intensity she'd once reserved for investment portfolios. The mathematician in her noted germination rates and days to maturity, but something deeper responded to the promise of colors and flavors that existed nowhere in the sterile aisles of her local supermarket. "What about soil preparation?" she asked, her voice gaining confidence. "I've been reading about amendments, but the science seems complex." Complex is just detailed," Tommy replied. "And detail is what separates good gardens from extraordinary ones. Tell you what, let me set you up with a soil test kit. Numbers don't lie, and I'm guessing you appreciate good data." As Tommy gathered supplies and explained soil chemistry with the enthusiasm of a professor discussing his favorite theorem, Liz felt pieces of herself clicking into place that she hadn't realized were missing. The analytical skills that had served her in corporate boardrooms found new purpose in understanding nutrient cycles and companion planting principles. She was so absorbed in Tommy's explanation of nitrogen fixation that she didn't notice the woman watching from the fertilizer aisle until a throat cleared behind her. "Excuse me?" The voice carried the polished courtesy of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about heirloom varieties." Liz turned to find a woman roughly her own age, impeccably dressed, despite the agricultural setting. Her silver hair was styled with the precision of a news anchor, and her manicured hands held a small bag of rose fertilizer, like it might contaminate her designer jacket. "Rosa Martinez," the woman introduced herself with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm president of the Fairfield County Garden Club. We're always delighted to welcome new enthusiasts to the community." The pause before enthusiasts carried weight that Liz's sensitive accountant's ear caught immediately. This was the tone she'd heard in corporate meetings when senior partners discussed junior staff, politely condescending, wrapped in false encouragement. "Elizabeth Thompson," Liz replied, offering her hand. "I'm just getting started, really. Learning as I go." "How wonderful." Rose's smile tightened fractionally. "Gardening can be such a rewarding hobby. Though I must say, starting with heirlooms is ambitious for a beginner. They can be quite temperamental. Perhaps you might consider something more reliable. Hybrid tomatoes are much more forgiving of inexperience." Tommy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained carefully neutral. "Mrs. Thompson's Cherokee Purples are already showing excellent germination. Sometimes beginner's luck is just good instincts." "Beginner's luck," Rosa repeated, her tone suggesting the phrase tasted bitter. "Well, yes, that does happen occasionally. Though, of course, true gardening success requires years of experience. Decades, really. My family has been growing prize-winning vegetables in this county for 3 generations." The subtext landed with the precision of a calculated insult. "You're an amateur. This is my territory. Know your place." Liz felt something shift inside her chest. Not the shrinking sensation she might have expected, but a quiet stiffening of resolve. The same instinct that had once helped her identify discrepancies in complex financial reports now recognized the territorial marking of someone threatened by potential competition. "I'm sure your experience is invaluable," Liz replied with the diplomatic courtesy she'd perfected in decades of corporate politics. "I'd love to learn from gardeners who've mastered the art." "Of course." Rosa's smile became genuinely warm for the first time. "The garden club meets the second Thursday of each month. Perhaps you'd like to attend as a guest. We could use someone to help with the refreshments." The suggestion hit like a perfectly aimed slight. Welcome to observe, useful for serving, but clearly not expected to contribute anything meaningful to the actual gardening discussion. "I'll keep that in mind," Liz said carefully. After Rosa departed with a wave that managed to be both gracious and dismissive, Tommy shook his head apologetically. "Don't let her get to you. Rosa's been queen bee around here for 20 years. Change makes her nervous." And I represent change? Lady, you walked in here asking intelligent questions about soil chemistry and heirloom varieties. Most people want the easiest possible garden with the least possible effort. You're talking about doing the work to understand the science. Tommy's grin was conspiratorial. That makes you dangerous to people who think gardening is about tradition and territory instead of passion and possibility. As Liz loaded her purchases into the car, soil amendments, exotic seeds, and a determination she hadn't possessed that morning, she found herself thinking about Rosa's carefully veiled warnings. The woman had recognized something in Liz that she herself was only beginning to understand. This wasn't going to remain a small hobby contained to one corner of her backyard. Driving home through the manicured neighborhoods of Fairfield County, Liz passed yard after yard of professional landscaping, geometric precision, seasonal color schemes, the horticultural equivalent of corporate uniforms. Beautiful, expensive, and utterly predictable. But in her rearview mirror, she carried packets of dragon tongue beans and glass gem corn, varieties that promised to transform her modest backyard into something no landscape architect would ever design. Something that would be entirely, authentically hers. The Cherokee Purple seedlings were waiting when she arrived home, their leaves slightly larger than they'd been that morning. She knelt beside them with her new soil test kit, following Tommy's instructions with the precision she'd once applied to auditing procedures. The numbers would tell her exactly what her soil needed, and she would provide it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As she worked, a movement in the neighboring yard caught her attention. An elderly woman sat on a weathered garden bench, watching with the patient interest of someone who had time to notice details. When their eyes met, the woman raised her hand in a small wave. "Lovely tomato seedlings," the neighbor called out, her voice carrying the authority of genuine knowledge. "Cherokee Purples, unless I miss my guess?" Liz straightened, surprised. "You can tell from this distance? 40 years of watching gardens grow." The woman rose from her bench with the careful deliberation of someone whose age had earned respect rather than dismissal. "Dorothy Whitfield, I live next door. Elizabeth Thompson, and yes, Cherokee Purples, though I'm still learning what I'm doing." Dorothy's laugh carried the warm rasp of someone who'd lived enough life to find genuine humor in most situations. "We're all still learning, dear. That's what makes it interesting. Though I'd suggest testing your soil before you expand much further. These old Connecticut properties can be tricky, beautiful on the surface, but sometimes the history runs deep." There was something in Dorothy's tone that suggested she meant more than soil chemistry. But before Liz could ask, the older woman had settled back onto her bench with a book and a cup of tea, clearly content to let wisdom settle at its own pace. As evening painted the sky in soft pastels, Liz found herself still kneeling beside her seedlings. Soil test results spread before her like a new kind of financial statement. The numbers told a story of possibility. Acidic soil that could be amended, nutrients that could be balanced, potential that could be unlocked with knowledge and patience. Somewhere in the gathering dusk, she made a decision that would have terrified the grieving widow of 3 weeks ago. Tomorrow, she would begin expanding. Not just the garden, but herself. She would learn everything Tommy could teach her about soil science and companion planting. She would attend Rosa's garden club meeting, not to serve refreshments, but to understand the competitive landscape she was entering. And in the quiet corner of her yard where Cherokee Purple seedlings reached toward tomorrow's sun, she would plant something extraordinary. A garden that proved passion had no expiration date, and that the most profound transformations often began with the smallest seeds. The sound of the rental truck's diesel engine rumbling down Maple Street at 7 in the morning announced Liz's intentions more clearly than any written declaration. She stood in her driveway, surveying the delivery like a general reviewing troops. 2 cubic yards of premium compost, 50 bags of aged manure, a dozen cedar-raised bed kits, and enough mulch to transform her modest backyard into something that would make Rosa Martinez reconsider every assumption she'd made about the quiet widow next door. Michael's rental car pulled up just as the delivery crew began unloading, his timing so precisely unfortunate that Liz wondered if he'd inherited more than her methodical nature, perhaps a sixth sense for maternal rebellion as well. "Mom?" His voice carried the carefully controlled panic of someone discovering their investment portfolio had been gambled on cryptocurrency. "What exactly is all this?" Liz wiped her soil-stained hands on the work apron she'd purchased from Tommy Rodriguez, a practical garment that would have horrified the Elizabeth Thompson who'd spent 45 years in pressed business suits. "Good morning, Michael. I'm expanding the garden." "Expanding?" He surveyed the delivery with the expression of someone calculating catastrophic financial losses. "This looks like you're building a farm. At your age, Mom, don't you think this is a bit ambitious?" The phrase hit with surgical precision, designed to invoke responsibility and caution and all the reasonable concerns that had governed her life since Robert's diagnosis. 3 months ago, she would have immediately begun justifying her choices, explaining her budget calculations, seeking his approval like a subordinate requesting a departmental expenditure increase. Instead, she found herself straightening with a confidence that surprised them both. "At my age, Michael, I've learned that ambitious is just another word for refusing to settle for less than I'm capable of." Michael's jaw tightened, a gesture inherited from his father, along with the tendency to view any deviation from predicted behavior as a threat to cosmic order. "Have you considered the physical demands, the maintenance requirements, the financial cost of this project? Have you considered that I successfully managed corporate budgets larger than most people's annual salaries?" The words emerged with accounting-precise clarity. "I think I can handle calculating fertilizer costs and planting schedules." The delivery crew worked around their confrontation with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to family drama playing out over major purchases. Liz signed for the delivery while Michael calculated costs on his phone, his fingers moving with the rapid anxiety of someone discovering their safety net had developed holes. "This had to cost thousands," he muttered. "Mom, if you needed a project, we could have found something more appropriate, adult coloring books, a pottery class, something that doesn't require manual labor." Elena Vasquez chose that moment to arrive with a thermos of coffee and the timing of someone who'd been watching from her kitchen window. Liz's friendship with Elena dated back to their children's elementary school years, surviving decades of busy careers and family obligations through the simple foundation of genuine affection and shared humor. "Elizabeth!" Elena's voice carried warmth and deliberate cheer. "What a wonderful transformation you're planning. The garden is going to be spectacular." Michael turned his attention to Elena with the relief of someone discovering a potential ally. "Elena, surely you can help me explain to Mom that this is too much for someone her age. The physical demands alone." "The physical demands," Elena interrupted with the gentle authority of someone who'd spent 30 years managing classroom dynamics, "are exactly what Elizabeth needs. Purpose, fresh air, meaningful work that produces tangible results. I wish I'd thought of it myself." She handed Liz a travel mug and surveyed the delivery with genuine enthusiasm. "Though I have to ask, what's the plan? Because this looks like you're preparing for some serious gardening." Liz felt pieces of a vision she'd been afraid to articulate crystallizing into words. Raised beds in geometric patterns, 4x8 rectangles for efficient maintenance, companion planting to maximize yield and natural pest control, a drip irrigation system for water conservation. Her voice gained strength with each detail. "I want to create something beautiful and productive and completely my own." Michael's expression suggested she'd announced plans to build a rocket ship. "Mom, you've never gardened before in your life. Don't you think you should start smaller?" maybe with container plants on the patio. I've never gardened because your father considered it a waste of time and money, Liz replied, her voice carrying 47 years of accumulated restraint. I've spent my entire adult life considering other people's opinions about what I should and shouldn't do. I'm 73 years old, Michael. How much time do you think I have left to waste on playing it safe? The silence that followed carried the weight of every conversation they'd never had about dreams deferred and possibilities dismissed. Michael's face cycled through expressions: surprise, concern, recognition, and finally something that might have been respect. Elena stepped into the quiet space between them. Your mother is the most organized, determined person I know. If anyone can turn this into something extraordinary, it's Elizabeth. But what if she gets hurt? What if this becomes too much to manage? Then I'll adapt, Liz answered before Elena could respond. I'll hire help. I'll modify techniques. I'll learn what works and what doesn't. But I won't stop before I start, just because the outcome isn't guaranteed. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw Robert's cautious pragmatism warring with something that might have been inherited pride. Michael, I spent 50 years being careful, being responsible, being exactly what everyone expected me to be. It got me a comfortable life and a secure retirement and absolutely no idea who I am when I'm not managing other people's expectations. The delivery crew finished unloading and departed, leaving the three of them surrounded by the raw materials of transformation. Liz surveyed her purchases with the satisfaction of someone who'd just made the most important investment of her life. I'm going to build something beautiful here, she said quietly. Something that proves it's never too late to discover what you're truly capable of. You can support that, or you can worry about it, but you can't stop it. Michael stood silent for a long moment, his executive mind clearly running risk assessments and contingency plans. Finally, he pulled out his phone. If you're determined to do this, at least let me research contractors for the irrigation system, and we should discuss backup plans for maintenance if this becomes overwhelming. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was acceptance. Liz smiled and handed him a work glove. First, help me figure out where these raised beds should go. I have a feeling this is going to be more challenging than any spreadsheet we've ever balanced. Mid-July arrived with the sultry weight of Connecticut summer, and Liz's backyard had transformed into something that defied every neighbor's expectations. Where 3 months earlier had stood Robert's precisely maintained lawn, now geometric, raised beds created a symphony of colors that no grocery store had ever imagined. The Cherokee Purple tomatoes hung heavy on their vines like dark jewels, while glass gem corn stalks reached toward the sky with the confidence of ancient totems. Dragon tongue beans cascaded from their trellises in purple-striped abundance, and the cosmic purple carrots promised treasures hidden beneath the soil. Liz knelt among her plants in the early morning coolness, harvesting with the methodical precision that had once governed quarterly reports, but now served a far more satisfying purpose. Her accountant's mind automatically calculated yields: 12 pounds of tomatoes from 6 plants, bean production exceeding every prediction she'd found online. But beneath the numbers lay something that no spreadsheet could quantify: pure, uncomplicated pride. The Cherokee Purples filled her harvest basket with their distinctive deep color and complex aroma. She selected the finest specimens, their weight substantial in her palm, their skin bearing the dusky bloom that marked perfect ripeness. These weren't the uniform red spheres from grocery store shelves, but something far more precious, proof that risk and patience could yield results more beautiful than safety ever offered. Tommy Rodriguez had warned her that Rosa Martinez's annual garden club meeting would be interesting this year, given the buzz that Liz's extraordinary first-season success had generated throughout their small gardening community. What he hadn't mentioned was how her modest selection of produce would completely upend the established social hierarchy of competitive horticulture. The meeting convened in Rosa's backyard, a showcase of traditional excellence that had dominated county fair competitions for 2 decades. Her heirloom tomatoes were textbook perfect, large, red, uniform specimens that spoke to years of refined technique and careful variety selection. The assembled garden club members arranged their contributions on a long table with the reverence of museum curators, each display representing hours of dedicated cultivation. Liz arrived with her modest basket, suddenly aware that her strange varieties might seem like curiosities rather than achievements. The other gardeners had brought familiar vegetables in impressive quantities: standard red tomatoes, yellow corn, green beans that looked exactly like their grocery store counterparts, but larger and obviously fresher. "Elizabeth?" Rosa's greeting carried the bright enthusiasm of someone welcoming a harmless amateur to observe serious gardening. "How wonderful that you've brought something to share. Your first-year enthusiasm is simply delightful." Liz unpacked her Cherokee Purples with careful attention, arranging them beside Rosa's pristine red varieties. The contrast was immediately apparent. Her tomatoes were darker, more irregular, carrying complex scents that spoke of smoke and earth and flavors that existed nowhere in commercial agriculture. Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield arrived fashionably late, her sharp eyes immediately assessing the table with the professional attention of someone whose botanical expertise had been earned through decades of university research. She paused at Liz's contribution, her eyebrows rising with what looked like genuine surprise. "Cherokee Purples," Dorothy murmured, picking up one of Liz's tomatoes with the reverence of someone handling a rare artifact. "And beautifully grown. Look at this shoulder development, the color saturation." She turned to address the assembled gardeners. "These are exceptional specimens. The flavor complexity in this variety requires perfect growing conditions, soil chemistry, water management, nutrient timing. This isn't beginner's luck, people. This is intuitive understanding." The attention shifted palpably toward Liz's corner of the table. Garden club members who'd been politely admiring Rosa's traditional display found themselves drawn to the exotic colors and unfamiliar shapes of Liz's harvest. Someone sliced into a Cherokee Purple, and the rich, complex aroma that emerged drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled gardeners. "The flavor is incredible," whispered Janet Chen, a longtime club member whose own tomatoes suddenly seemed pedestrian by comparison. "It's like smoky sweetness with hints of wine. I've never tasted anything like it." Rosa's smile maintained its perfect composure, but Liz's sensitive accountant's instincts caught the microscopic tightening around her eyes. This wasn't how the script was supposed to unfold. New members were expected to observe and learn, not arrive with vegetables that made 20 years of traditional gardening look ordinary. "Of course, exotic varieties can be quite unpredictable," Rosa commented with carefully modulated authority. "One good season doesn't necessarily indicate consistent performance. Traditional varieties have proven reliability over generations of cultivation." "Traditional varieties," Dorothy replied with the dry precision of someone who'd spent decades correcting misconceptions, "are traditional because they're safe. But safety rarely produces excellence. What Elizabeth has achieved here represents genuine horticultural artistry." The compliment settled over the gathering like sunlight after storm clouds, warm and illuminating and completely unexpected. Liz felt something shift in her chest. Not just pride in her accomplishments, but recognition that she belonged in this community, not as an observer or amateur, but as someone whose instincts and dedication had produced results that demanded respect. Tommy Rodriguez arrived as the informal tasting was reaching its peak, his timing suggesting he'd been monitoring the situation from a distance. "Mrs. Thompson," he announced with barely contained excitement, "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding the county fair. Have you considered entering the competition this year?" The suggestion landed like a challenge thrown down in the center of a diplomatic negotiation. Rosa's composure cracked slightly, revealing the competitive instincts that had driven 3 generations of Martinez family victories. The county fair? Rosa's laugh carried just enough condescension to sting. Well, that's quite ambitious for someone who's been gardening for, what, 4 months? The competition is rather serious, you understand. Judges have very specific standards, decades of experience evaluating traditional varieties. Traditional varieties, Tommy repeated thoughtfully, and exceptional execution of any variety that demonstrates superior growing techniques and outstanding results. Liz found herself caught between excitement and intimidation. The county fair represented validation on a level she'd never imagined when she'd first planted those forgotten Cherokee Purple seeds, but it also meant competing directly against Rosa's established dominance, challenging not just her gardening expertise, but her position as the community's recognized authority. I'd need to learn so much about proper presentation, competition standards, Liz said carefully. Details, Dorothy interjected with the confidence of someone who'd judged countless academic competitions. You've already mastered the difficult part, growing extraordinary vegetables. The rest is just paperwork and organization, skills I suspect you possess in abundance. As the garden club meeting wound down, Liz found herself surrounded by members, requesting growing advice, asking about soil amendments and seed sources, treating her like the expert she'd never expected to become. Rosa maintained her gracious hostess demeanor, but her contributions to conversations grew progressively shorter and sharper. Walking home through the humid evening air, Liz carried her empty basket and a head full of possibilities that would have terrified the grieving widow of 4 months earlier. The county fair loomed ahead like a mountain peak, challenging, potentially dangerous, but offering views that could only be earned through the courage to climb. Behind her, Rosa Martinez stood in her perfect traditional garden, surrounded by decades of reliable success, watching her newest neighbor disappear into the dusk and wondering when exactly the rules of their small gardening world had begun to change. The Fairfield County Fair entry forms spread across Liz's kitchen table like battle plans, each category representing a different front in what had evolved from therapeutic gardening into something approaching warfare. Best heirloom tomato. Most unusual vegetable. Best overall garden produce. She checked boxes with the same methodical precision that had once governed tax preparation, but her pulse quickened with an anticipation that quarterly reports had never inspired. Elena sat across from her, laptop open, researching competition standards with the thoroughness of someone preparing for academic combat. According to the fair website, judging criteria include size, color, uniformity, and overall excellence of presentation. Rosa's won Best Heirloom Tomato 6 years running. 6 years, Liz repeated, studying photographs of previous winners. That looked suspiciously identical to Rosa's garden club specimens. All traditional red varieties. Well, Elena's grin carried mischievous satisfaction. This year they're going to see what purple excellence looks like. The decision to enter had crystallized during sleepless nights spent calculating risk versus regret. At 73, how many opportunities remained to discover what she was truly capable of? The mathematics were sobering and liberating in equal measure. Every month of caution was a month that couldn't be reclaimed. Tommy Rodriguez had become her unofficial competition coach, arriving each morning with advice that transformed her backyard into something approaching a laboratory. Soil testing became daily ritual. Nutrient timing followed schedules more precise than any corporate deadline. Her Cherokee Purples received attention that Robert had once reserved for his investment portfolio. Competition gardening is different. From growing for pleasure, Tommy explained, demonstrating proper fruit selection techniques. You're not just growing vegetables, you're growing potential champions. Every decision from pruning to watering affects the final product. Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield emerged as an unexpected ally, sharing knowledge accumulated through decades of botanical research. Her afternoon visits became master classes in plant physiology, pest management, and the subtle artistry of maximizing genetic potential. The secret, Dorothy confided while examining Liz's dragon tongue beans, isn't forcing plants to exceed their nature. It's creating conditions where their nature can express itself perfectly. The physical demands proved more challenging than Liz had anticipated. Competition-level gardening required precision that tested her 73-year-old body in ways that corporate accounting never had. Early morning watering sessions, afternoon pruning in 90-degree heat, evening soil monitoring that left her knees aching and her back protesting. The injury happened on a Thursday in late July, when ambition exceeded physical capability by precisely the margin necessary to strain muscles that had spent decades adapted to desk chairs rather than garden rows. Liz reached too far, twisted wrong, and felt something in her lower back announce its limits with sharp authority. Elena found her 30 minutes later, sitting on her garden bench with the careful stillness of someone afraid to discover how badly they'd hurt themselves. "Elizabeth, what happened?" "What?" "I think I may have overestimated my physical resilience," Liz admitted, her voice carrying the careful control of someone managing both pain and embarrassment. Elena's assessment was swift and practical. Ice, anti-inflammatories, and a conversation about sustainable gardening practices. This is exactly what Michael was worried about. Michael's phone call that evening carried the carefully modulated concern of someone whose worst predictions were being validated. "Mom, Elena told me about your back. Maybe this is a sign that you should reconsider the competition idea." "Maybe," Liz replied, shifting carefully on her heating pad. "This is a sign that I need to be smarter about how I approach challenges, not that I should avoid them entirely. At your age, Michael." The interruption carried enough steel to stop his familiar refrain. "I'm going to compete in that fair. The only question is whether I do it with your support or despite your concern." The silence stretched long enough for her to wonder if she'd finally pushed their relationship past some invisible boundary. When Michael spoke again, his voice carried resignation rather than anger. "What do you need?" The answer surprised them both. "Help. Not management. Partnership. Your project management skills applied to my gardening goals." Rosa Martinez's reaction to news of Liz's fair entry revealed competitive instincts that polite garden club meetings had carefully concealed. The information reached her through the garden center gossip network with the efficiency of insider trading rumors. "She's entering after 4 months of gardening?" Rosa's voice carried the incredulous tone of someone discovering that amateurs were being admitted to professional competitions. Does she understand the level of expertise required? The years of experience that serious competitors possess? Tommy Rodriguez's response, overheard by 3 customers and immediately reported throughout their small community, became local legend. Excellence isn't measured in years, it's measured in results. The subtle campaign began immediately. Casual comments about hobby gardeners, not understanding real competition. Suggestions that newcomers might benefit from observing a few seasons before attempting to compete. Observations about the importance of paying dues and respecting established expertise. Elena emerged as Liz's fiercest defender, countering Rosa's diplomatic attacks with the precision of someone who'd spent decades managing passive-aggressive colleagues. Elizabeth's vegetables speak for themselves. If Rosa is concerned about competition, perhaps she should focus on improving her own garden rather than diminishing others' achievements. As the fair approached, Liz's backyard became a careful balance between ambition and adaptation. Elena helped design ergonomic solutions that minimized physical strain. Tommy provided specialized tools that reduced repetitive stress. Dorothy shared techniques for maximizing results while minimizing effort. The Cherokee Purples responded to competition-level attention by exceeding every expectation Liz had harbored. Their deep purple shoulders developed with textbook perfection. Their size approached Tommy's most optimistic predictions. Their flavor complexity reached levels that made grocery store tomatoes seem like cardboard approximations of the real thing. But it was her dragon tongue beans that truly defied probability. Purple-striped pods hanging in abundance that no first-year gardener should have achieved. Mrs. Whitfield pronounced them specimens worthy of botanical illustration, praise that carried the weight of professional recognition. The final weeks before the fair passed in a blur of careful cultivation and strategic planning. Liz selected her competition entries with the analytical precision of portfolio management, but her motivation transcended any trophy or ribbon. She was proving something to herself, to Michael, to Rosa Martinez, and to every voice that whispered about age and limitations and appropriate expectations. 3 days before the fair, she stood among her plants in the golden light of early evening, surveying achievements that would have seemed impossible when she'd first discovered those forgotten Cherokee Purple seeds. Tomorrow would bring final preparations. The day after, judgment. But tonight, surrounded by vegetables that defied conventional wisdom and flowers that bloomed with late-season abundance, Elizabeth Thompson smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already won the only competition that truly mattered. The Fairfield County Fair dawned with the crisp clarity of early September, the kind of morning that promised perfect conditions for outdoor competitions and high-stakes gardening. Drama. Liz arrived at the fairgrounds at 6:30, her carefully selected Cherokee Purples nestled in padded containers like precious gems being transported to auction. The produce barn buzzed with nervous energy as competitors arranged their entries, with the focused intensity of museum curators preparing opening night exhibitions. Rosa Martinez commanded her usual corner space, her traditional red tomatoes displayed with the confident authority of someone who'd never questioned her dominance. Her setup looked like a professional agricultural demonstration, precisely arranged, uniformly perfect, backed by generations of proven technique. Liz found her assigned table space feeling like an outsider at an exclusive club, but her Cherokee Purples drew immediate attention from early arriving judges. The deep purple shoulders and complex coloring created visual drama that Rosa's traditional varieties couldn't match, while their substantial size suggested flavors that transcended ordinary tomato expectations. Interesting variety choice, commented Judge Patricia Walsh, a master gardener whose reputation for rigorous standards had made her evaluation both coveted and feared. Cherokee Purples are notoriously difficult to grow well. They require perfect soil chemistry and precise water management. I've been fortunate with the growing conditions, Liz replied with careful modesty, though her accountant's precision had ensured those conditions through methodical soil testing and calculated nutrient timing. Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield arrived, with the punctuality of someone whose presence at community events carried unofficial authority. She surveyed the competition displays with the professional assessment of her botanical background, pausing longest at Liz's contribution. Exceptional specimens, Dorothy announced loudly enough for nearby competitors to hear. The shoulder. Development is textbook perfect, and that color saturation indicates optimal growing conditions. This is horticultural artistry. Rosa's smile maintained its practiced graciousness, but Liz caught the microscopic tightening around her eyes that suggested carefully controlled irritation. Of course, Dorothy, one good season doesn't necessarily indicate consistent capability. Competition gardening requires proven reliability across multiple years. Proven reliability, Dorothy replied with academic precision, often means proven mediocrity. Excellence tends to emerge from willingness to attempt something challenging. The judging process unfolded with ceremonial gravity that elevated vegetable evaluation to the level of wine tasting. Judges examined entries for size, uniformity, color, and overall presentation, but the critical test remained flavor, the ultimate measure that separated impressive appearance from genuine excellence. Rosa's tomatoes performed exactly as expected, solid, reliable, demonstrating the competent execution of traditional techniques. They looked like winners, tasted like quality, and carried the weight of established reputation. When Judge Walsh bit into Liz's Cherokee Purple, her expression shifted from professional neutrality to something approaching surprise. She chewed thoughtfully, her eyebrows rising with genuine appreciation. "The flavor complexity is remarkable," she murmured to her fellow judges. "Smoky sweetness with wine-like undertones. This isn't just a beautiful tomato, it's a completely different eating experience." The other judges confirmed the assessment, their expressions carrying the excitement of discovery. Tommy Rodriguez watched from the spectator area with barely contained satisfaction, while Elena documented everything with the thoroughness of someone recording historical moments. But it was Liz's dragon tongue beans that truly disrupted conventional expectations. The purple-striped pods created visual drama unlike anything in the competition's recent memory, while their tender texture and complex flavor suggested expertise that no 4-month gardener should have possessed. "How did you achieve this pod development?" Judge Walsh asked, studying the beans with professional fascination. "Dragon tongue varieties typically require several seasons to reach this quality level. Careful attention to soil chemistry and companion planting," Liz replied, though she suspected her success owed as much to intuitive understanding as technical knowledge. "I treated each plant like a unique individual, rather than following generic growing guidelines." Rosa's contributions to the conversation grew progressively shorter as judges spent increasing time examining Liz's entries. Her traditional varieties, which had dominated competitions through reliable excellence, suddenly seemed ordinary beside the exotic colors and complex flavors of her amateur competitors' harvest. The announcement of winners arrived with all the ceremony of Olympic medal presentations. Rosa Martinez claimed second place in Best Traditional Tomato, a category that might have been created specifically for her previous dominance. Her gracious acceptance speech carried undertones of confusion about how established excellence had been relegated to runner-up status. When Judge Walsh announced Elizabeth Thompson as winner of Best Heirloom Tomato, the applause carried genuine appreciation for an achievement that transcended simple gardening success. At 73, after 4 months of serious cultivation, she had produced vegetables that impressed judges accustomed to evaluating decades of experience. But the moment that crystallized her transformation came with the announcement of Best in Show, the overall competition winner whose entry represented the fair's highest standard of horticultural excellence. This year's Best in Show winner has demonstrated that excellence emerges from passion, dedication, and willingness to attempt something extraordinary. Elizabeth Thompson's Cherokee Purple tomatoes represent not just superior growing technique, but the courage to pursue perfection without guarantee of success. The blue ribbon felt substantial in Liz's palm, its weight representing more than competitive victory. 4 months earlier, she had been a grieving widow organizing sympathy cards. Now she stood surrounded by gardeners seeking advice about soil, amendments, and growing techniques, treated as an expert whose opinion carried genuine authority. Rosa Martinez approached during the congratulations period, her expression carefully composed, but her voice carrying undertones that suggested internal struggle between gracious sportsmanship and competitive disappointment. "Congratulations, Elizabeth. Your beginner's luck has been quite remarkable." "Thank you, Rosa. Though I suspect 4 months of 18-hour days might be less about luck and more about dedication." The newspaper photographer captured Liz's triumphant moment, blue ribbons in hand, surrounded by vegetables that defied conventional wisdom about age, experience, and appropriate expectations. The image would run in Tuesday's edition with a caption that identified her as local gardening sensation Elizabeth Thompson. Walking to her car through the September evening, Liz carried ribbons that represented validation she'd never expected to seek. But more importantly, she carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd discovered capabilities that decades of careful living had never revealed. Behind her, Rosa Martinez stood among her second-place ribbons, watching her newest competitor disappear into the parking lot and wondering when exactly the rules of their small gardening world had been rewritten by a 73-year-old woman who'd refused to accept that excellence had expiration dates. The Fairfield County Gazette's Tuesday edition featured Liz's triumphant moment above the fold, her blue ribbons catching the camera's flash like badges of honor earned through soil and sweat. Local gardening sensation wins county fair best. In-show read the headline, accompanied by a photograph that captured not just victory, but transformation. A 73-year-old woman holding vegetables that had redefined community expectations about age and excellence. Elena arrived at Liz's kitchen table Wednesday morning with the newspaper, 3 copies of the article, and barely contained excitement. "Elizabeth, you're famous! Mrs. Patterson from the post office said people have been asking about you all morning. The hardware store is completely sold out of Cherokee Purple seeds." Liz studied the photograph with the surreal detachment of seeing herself through others' eyes. The woman in the picture looked confident, accomplished, radiating the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd exceeded every prediction, including her own. "It feels strange," she admitted, "being recognized for something I discovered by accident." "Not accident. Instinct," Elena corrected with the firmness of someone who'd witnessed the transformation firsthand. "You have natural talent that most people spend decades trying to develop." The phone began ringing before noon. Tommy Rodriguez called to report unprecedented interest in heirloom varieties. Mrs. Whitfield stopped by with congratulations and subtle suggestions about expanding her growing operation. Even neighbors who'd never spoken to her before found reasons to walk past her garden, their curious glances carrying new respect for the quiet widow who'd become their community's horticultural celebrity. But it was Elena's next suggestion that truly challenged Liz's comfort zone: social media. "Social media?" Liz repeated the phrase like Elena had suggested skydiving. "I can barely manage email without technical difficulties." Instagram, Facebook, platforms where people share photos and stories. Your garden journey could inspire thousands of people who think they're too old to start something new. Elena's enthusiasm carried the infectious quality of someone who'd discovered a mission. Think about it. How many 73-year-olds are sitting in their living rooms right now, convinced they've missed their chance for anything extraordinary? The learning curve proved steeper than any soil chemistry Liz had mastered. Elena patiently explained hashtags, filters, and the mysterious algorithms that determined which content gained attention. They started modestly, photos of the Cherokee Purples that had started everything, paired with simple captions about discovering passion later in life. The response exceeded every expectation Elena had harbored. Liz's first post about planting new seeds at 73 attracted hundreds of likes and dozens of comments from people sharing their own stories of late-life discoveries. Retirement-age followers described starting businesses, learning instruments, traveling solo for the first time, a community of people who'd refused to accept that their best years were behind them. Michael's quarterly visit coincided with Liz's social media debut, and his arrival found her surrounded by printed screenshots of encouraging comments and follower statistics that Elena tracked with scientific precision. "Mom?" His voice carried the careful concern of someone discovering their parent had joined an organization of questionable reputation. "Elena mentioned you're on social media now?" "Facebook and Instagram," Liz confirmed with pride that surprised them both. 3,000 followers as of this morning. People from 12 countries have commented on my gardening posts. Michael studied the printed comments with the expression of someone reviewing quarterly reports that defied logical explanation. Messages from Australia, Germany, Japan. Elderly people inspired by her story to attempt their own late-life adventures. "This is actually quite impressive," he admitted reluctantly, "though I hope you're being careful about privacy settings and not sharing too much personal information." "Your mother," Elena interjected with gentle amusement, "has become quite sophisticated about online safety. She's also become something of an inspiration to people worldwide who thought they'd missed their chance for new achievements. For the first time since Robert's death, Michael looked at his mother with something approaching awe rather than concern. "You've really done something extraordinary here, haven't you?" The transformation in their relationship felt as significant as any blue ribbon. Michael began asking questions about soil composition and growing techniques with genuine interest rather than patronizing concern. He photographed her garden with the enthusiasm of someone documenting historical achievement, sharing images with his Silicon Valley colleagues who responded with surprising appreciation for horticultural artistry. But it was Sarah, Michael's wife, who truly understood the broader significance of Liz's journey. Her environmental science background gave her framework for appreciating not just the gardening success, but the sustainable practices and heirloom variety preservation that Liz had unknowingly embraced. "What you're doing matters beyond personal achievement," Sarah explained during a video call from California. "You're preserving genetic diversity, demonstrating sustainable growing practices, and proving that food production can be both beautiful and environmentally responsible." The validation from her daughter-in-law carried weight that blue ribbons couldn't match, recognition that her garden represented something larger than personal fulfillment. 3 weeks after the newspaper article appeared, Liz's Instagram post about harvesting dragon tongue beans reached 10,000 views and caught the attention of someone whose interest would change everything. James Patterson, of Food Network's producer researching heartwarming gardening stories for an upcoming segment about inspiring home gardeners. Patterson's assistant contacted Liz through Instagram's messaging system, a digital communication that Elena discovered during their regular social media review session. "Elizabeth, you need to read this." Elena's voice carried barely controlled excitement. "Food Network wants to feature your story." The message was brief but transformative. "Ms. Thompson, we've been following your remarkable gardening journey and would love to discuss featuring your story in an upcoming Food Network segment about inspiring gardeners. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience." Liz stared at the screen with the stunned expression of someone whose hobby had suddenly attracted national attention. Food Network? The television channel? The television channel. "That reaches millions of viewers," Elena confirmed, her voice rising with excitement. "Elizabeth, do you understand what this means? Your story could inspire people across the entire country?" The possibility felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Television exposure meant validation on a scale she'd never imagined, but it also meant stepping into a public arena where her private transformation would become entertainment for strangers. "What would I even say?" Liz asked, her accountant's mind immediately calculating the complexity of such an undertaking. "You'd tell the truth," Elena replied simply, "that it's never too late to discover what you're capable of. That passion doesn't have expiration dates. That sometimes the most extraordinary achievements begin with the smallest acts of courage." As evening settled over her garden, Liz walked among plants that had started as therapeutic grief management and evolved into something approaching artistry. The Cherokee Purples hung heavy on their vines, their deep purple shoulders catching the last light of day. Somewhere in California, a Food Network producer was preparing to call about featuring her story on national television. The 73-year-old woman who'd once hidden seed catalogs from her husband's disapproval now faced the prospect of sharing her journey with millions of viewers. The transformation felt as dramatic as the seasons themselves, from dormancy through growth to unexpected bloom. James Patterson's voice carried the crisp professionalism of someone accustomed to transforming ordinary stories into television. Gold, but beneath the producer polish, Liz detected genuine warmth that made the surreal nature of their conversation feel almost manageable. "Mrs. Thompson, I'll be direct. Your story is exactly what we've been searching for. A 73-year-old woman who discovers her passion through gardening and achieves remarkable success in her first season? That's the kind of authentic inspiration our viewers crave." Liz sat in her kitchen, Elena beside her taking notes. with the thoroughness of someone documenting historical negotiations, while outside her window, the garden that had started everything swayed in the October breeze. 6 months ago, she'd been organizing sympathy cards. Now a television producer was discussing featuring her story on national television. What exactly would this involve? Liz asked, her accountant's mind immediately seeking concrete details about abstract possibilities. A day of filming at your home, focusing on your garden and your story. We'd interview you about your journey, document your growing techniques, and capture the visual beauty of what you've created. The segment would air as part of our Inspiring Gardens series, stories about people who've found transformation through growing things. The scope felt manageable until Patterson continued with details that expanded the opportunity's complexity. We're particularly drawn to the late-life aspect of your story. So many viewers assume their chance for new achievements has passed. Your success proves that passion and dedication can bloom at any age. Elena scribbled furiously while Patterson outlined logistics, filming schedules, interview topics, the potential reach of Food Network's audience. Millions of viewers. National exposure. Her private transformation becoming public inspiration. I need to think about this, Liz said carefully. It's quite overwhelming. Of course. Take the time you need. Though I should mention, we'd like to film within the next few weeks, while your fall harvest is still at peak beauty. The visual storytelling would be spectacular with your current growing season as backdrop. After Patterson hung up, Liz and Elena sat in silence that felt heavy with possibility and apprehension in equal measure. Elena broke the quiet first. Elizabeth, do you understand the significance of this opportunity? Food Network reaches millions of people. Your story could inspire countless others to pursue dreams they've abandoned. It could also expose my private life to public scrutiny, Liz replied, her voice carrying the caution of someone who'd spent decades avoiding attention. What if I say something wrong? What if I can't articulate why this matters so much? Elena's response carried the fierce loyalty of someone who'd witnessed transformation firsthand. You'll tell the truth about discovering yourself through dirt and seeds and vegetables that taste like hope? If that doesn't inspire people, nothing will. Michael and Sarah's arrival that evening transformed the kitchen into an informal crisis management center. They'd driven from the airport immediately after Liz's phone call, their concern and excitement creating emotional whiplash that left everyone slightly dizzy. Food Network? Michael's voice carried the same stunned tone he'd used when discovering her fair victories. Mom, this is huge. Do you understand the exposure this could bring? Sarah's environmental science background gave her framework for appreciating the broader implications. Elizabeth, your story could reach people who've never considered sustainable gardening or heirloom variety preservation. You could influence food choices on a massive scale. But what about privacy concerns? Michael's executive mind immediately calculated potential complications. Television exposure brings public attention that can't be controlled or managed. Liz found herself caught between excitement and terror, opportunity and vulnerability. What if I'm not interesting enough for television? What if my story seems ordinary when it's examined by professional storytellers? Ordinary? Elena's voice carried indignation. Elizabeth, you transformed from grieving widow to county fair champion in 6 months. You've inspired thousands of people through social media to pursue dreams they'd abandoned. There's nothing ordinary about what you've accomplished. The discussion continued past midnight, examining angles and implications with the thoroughness of corporate strategic planning. Sarah emerged as an unexpected advocate, her scientific background giving weight to arguments about Liz's broader impact on sustainable food systems and late-life achievement narratives. You could change how society views aging and capability. Sarah argued with passion that surprised everyone. Television reaches demographics that social media doesn't touch. Your story could inspire people who've never heard of Instagram or Cherokee Purple tomatoes. Rosa Martinez's reaction to news of the Food Network opportunity revealed competitive instincts that polite community interactions had carefully concealed. The information reached her through Tommy Rodriguez, who'd been contacted by Patterson's assistant for background information about local gardening culture. Food Network wants to feature her? Rose's voice carried the incredulous tone of someone discovering that amateurs were being awarded professional recognition. After 8 months of gardening? What about gardeners who've spent decades perfecting their craft? Tommy's diplomatic response became neighborhood legend within hours. Excellence isn't measured in decades. It's measured in results that inspire others to attempt their own extraordinary achievements. But Rose's reaction provided the perspective that crystallized Liz's decision. The territorial resentment, the suggestions that recognition should follow established hierarchies, the assumption that newcomers must serve lengthy apprenticeships before earning acknowledgement, all of it represented exactly the kind of thinking that had kept her dreams dormant for 50 years. "I'm going to do it," Liz announced the next morning, her voice carrying the quiet determination that had driven her from seeds to county fair victory. "Not because I think I deserve television attention, but because maybe someone watching will realize they're not too old to plant new seeds." Michael's response surprised everyone, including himself. "What support do you need? Because whatever this requires, interview preparation, garden staging, media management, we're going to make sure you're ready." Elena immediately began researching television interview techniques with the thoroughness of someone preparing for academic examination. Sarah volunteered to help articulate the environmental significance of Liz's growing practices. Even Michael contributed project management skills that transformed abstract opportunity into concrete preparation timeline. The call to Patterson felt like crossing a threshold from private achievement to public commitment. "Mr. Patterson, this is Elizabeth Thompson. I'd like to accept your offer to feature my story." "Wonderful. I'll have our production coordinator contact you about scheduling. Mrs. Thompson, I think viewers are going to be deeply inspired by your journey." As evening settled over the garden that had started everything, Liz walked among plants that represented more than vegetables. They were proof that transformation could begin at any age, that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances, that it was never too late to discover what you were truly capable of achieving. Somewhere in a Food Network office, producers were planning to share her story with millions of viewers. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, but beneath both emotions lay something more fundamental: pride in becoming someone worthy of such attention. The 73-year-old woman who'd once hidden seed catalogs from her husband's disapproval was about to tell her story on national television. The transformation felt as miraculous as the seasons themselves, from dormancy through growth to extraordinary bloom that could inspire others to plant their own seeds of possibility. The Food Network production trucks arrived at dawn on a crisp October morning, transforming Liz's quiet Connecticut neighborhood into something resembling a Hollywood film set. Equipment cases lined her driveway like military ordnance, while technicians strung cables and positioned cameras with the precise choreography of people who'd turned storytelling into science. Liz stood at her kitchen window, watching the invasion, with the stunned fascination of someone whose private world was being reconfigured for public consumption. 6 months ago, her most dramatic daily event had been sorting mail. Now professional cinematographers were calculating light angles to showcase vegetables that had started as grief therapy. "Nervous?" Elena asked, arriving with coffee and the moral support of someone who'd witnessed every step of this unlikely journey. "Terrified," Liz admitted honestly. "What if I freeze up? What if my story sounds ridiculous when professionals examine it?" James Patterson materialized beside them with the efficient timing of someone accustomed to managing pre-production anxiety. In person, he carried the reassuring authority of someone who'd guided countless nervous subjects through their moment of television scrutiny. "Mrs. Thompson, I want you to remember something important. We're here because your story is extraordinary. Not because we're trying to make it extraordinary. but because it already is. My job is simply to help you share it authentically. The filming process began with establishing shots that captured the visual drama of her transformed backyard. Cameras swept across raised beds geometric in their precision, lingering on Cherokee purples that hung like dark jewels against autumn foliage. The dragon tongue beans cascaded from their trellises in purple-striped abundance that no television audience had ever seen growing in a suburban Connecticut garden. "Tell me about that first day," Patterson prompted as cameras rolled, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone skilled at drawing stories from reluctant subjects. "What made you plant those initial tomato seeds?" Liz found herself speaking with surprising fluency about discovering the forgotten seed packet, about Robert's dismissive notes contrasted with her secret dreams, about the ritualistic act of pressing seeds into soil while grief still felt like physical weight in her chest. "I think I was planting more than tomatoes," she realized aloud, the insight emerging as she spoke. "I was planting the possibility that I could still become someone different from who I'd been for 50 years. The interview revealed depths of her transformation that she'd never articulated, even to herself. Patterson's questions drew connections between gardening techniques and life philosophy, between soil chemistry and personal growth, between the patience required for cultivation and the courage necessary for late-life reinvention. "Your Cherokee Purples have become somewhat legendary in local gardening circles," Patterson observed, examining fruit that demonstrated textbook perfection. "What do you attribute to their exceptional quality?" "Attention," Liz replied after careful consideration. "I treated each plant like it mattered, like its success was important enough to justify whatever effort it required. I suppose that's not how I'd approached most things in my life before, with that level of focused care." Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield arrived during the afternoon filming session, her timing suggesting she'd been monitoring the production from her kitchen window. Her presence immediately elevated the interview's credibility, as Patterson recognized the authority that 40 years of botanical expertise brought to any gardening discussion. "Elizabeth's achievement represents genuine horticultural artistry," Dorothy stated with academic precision. "The soil chemistry knowledge, the companion planting strategies, the pest management techniques, these aren't beginner's luck. This is intuitive understanding that most gardeners spend decades trying to develop." Tommy Rodriguez contributed testimonials that positioned Liz's success within the broader context of their gardening community. "She asks the right questions, implements suggestions with scientific precision, and achieves results that honestly make experienced growers jealous. Age isn't a limitation when someone possesses this level of natural talent and dedication." But it was Rosa Martinez's unexpected appearance that created the day's most dramatic moment. She arrived during the final interview session, her timing and expressions suggesting internal struggle between community courtesy and competitive resentment. Rosa had clearly prepared for this encounter, her appearance meticulously arranged, her manner carrying the controlled authority of someone accustomed to representing local gardening expertise. "I wanted to welcome your production team to our community," Rosa announced with diplomatic precision, "though I feel obligated to provide some context about realistic expectations for beginning gardeners." Patterson's journalistic instincts immediately recognized developing tension. "What kind of context, Mrs. Martinez?" "Well," Rosa's smile maintained perfect composure, while her words carried unmistakable implication. "Exceptional results in a single season sometimes raise questions about methodology. Experienced gardeners understand that consistent excellence requires proven techniques developed over many years." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a carefully controlled fire, not direct enough to constitute open attack, but clear enough to plant seeds of doubt about Liz's authenticity. Rosa was suggesting, with diplomatic subtlety, that Liz's success might involve shortcuts or assistance that violated the unwritten rules of competitive gardening. Dorothy Whitfield's response carried the sharp authority of someone whose professional reputation had been built on distinguishing excellence from fraud. Rosa, are you questioning Elizabeth's integrity? Of course not, Rosa replied quickly. I'm simply noting that experienced gardeners recognize certain inconsistencies when novices achieve results that typically require years of learning. The confrontation crystallized months of accumulated tension between established authority and emerging excellence. Liz felt every eye in the production crew focusing on her response, waiting to see how she'd handle this public challenge to her credibility. Rosa, Liz said quietly, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone who'd learned to trust her own capabilities. I understand your skepticism. 8 months ago, I would have agreed that what I've accomplished seems impossible. But I've kept detailed records of every soil test, every fertilizer application, every watering schedule. My methods are documented with the same precision I used in 45 years of corporate accounting. She gestured toward her raised beds with growing confidence. These vegetables grew from seeds I planted, in soil I prepared, through techniques I researched and implemented. If that seems inconsistent with your expectations about novice capabilities, perhaps the inconsistency lies in assumptions about what people can achieve when they commit completely to something they're passionate about. Patterson captured the entire exchange with the skill of someone who recognized television gold when it emerged organically. The confrontation revealed not just Rosa's territorial concerns, but Liz's evolution from tentative amateur to confident expert who could defend her achievements with quiet authority. Tommy Rodriguez diffused the tension by providing documentation that supported Liz's claims. I've sold Elizabeth every seed, every soil amendment, every tool she's used. I've answered hundreds of questions about growing techniques, and I've watched her implement advice with scientific precision. There's nothing mysterious about her success except the level of dedication she's brought to learning. Mrs. Whitfield's final assessment carried the weight of professional judgment. I've observed Elizabeth's garden development from the beginning. Her success represents exactly what happens when natural talent meets methodical learning and absolute commitment. Rosa's surprise says more about limited expectations than questionable achievements. As the production crew began dismantling equipment in the golden light of late afternoon, Liz surveyed her garden with new appreciation for what she'd accomplished. The vegetables that had started as grief therapy had become proof of capabilities she'd never suspected she possessed. Patterson's final interview captured the broader significance of her journey. What would you say to viewers who think they're too old to start something new? Liz considered the question while autumn light painted her Cherokee purples in shades of possibility. I'd say that age brings advantages younger people don't possess: patience, perspective, and the wisdom to focus on what truly matters. I spent 50 years being careful, being safe, being exactly what others expected. At 73, I finally discovered what I was capable of when I stopped worrying about failing and started focusing on growing. The cameras captured her, surrounded by vegetables that defied conventional wisdom about late-life limitations, her face carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd discovered that extraordinary achievements could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. As the production trucks departed into the Connecticut evening, Liz walked among plants that had transformed from therapeutic hobby into national inspiration. Tomorrow, her story would reach millions of viewers who might discover their own seeds of possibility. Behind her kitchen window, Rosa Martinez watched the neighborhood return to normal, her expression carrying the complex emotions of someone whose worldview had been challenged by unexpected excellence emerging from the most unlikely circumstances. The quiet widow next door had become something Rosa hadn't anticipated, not just a competitor, but living proof that passion could bloom at any age. The Food Network segment aired on a Tuesday evening in late November, reaching 3 million viewers who witnessed Elizabeth Thompson's transformation from grieving widow to gardening sensation. Liz watched the broadcast from her living room, surrounded by Elena, Michael, Sarah, and a nervous anticipation that felt more intense than any county fair competition. Seeing herself on national television created a surreal disconnect. The confident woman on screen discussing soil chemistry and late-life passion seemed like someone she recognized but had never expected to become. The producers had crafted her story with the emotional resonance of a feature film, capturing not just her gardening success, but the broader themes of reinvention, courage, and the refusal to accept that dreams had expiration dates. Elizabeth, the television version of herself, said with quiet authority, "I spent 50 years being careful, being safe, being exactly what others expected. At 73, I finally discovered what I was capable of when I stopped worrying about failing and started focusing on growing." The segment concluded with sweeping shots of her autumn garden, Cherokee purples hanging like dark jewels against golden foliage, while narrator commentary positioned her story within the broader context of Americans discovering new purposes in retirement. "This is extraordinary," Sarah breathed, watching the credits roll. "Elizabeth, you've just inspired millions of people to reconsider what's possible in their own lives." The immediate response exceeded every prediction Elena had harbored during her social media management. Liz's Instagram followers jumped from 12,000 to 60,000 overnight. Her Facebook messages filled with stories from viewers across the country. Retirees describing new businesses they plan to start. Elderly people sharing photos of their first garden attempts. Adult children thanking her for inspiring their aging parents to pursue abandoned dreams. Michael documented the surge with the fascination of someone watching viral marketing unfold in real time. "Mom, your story has been shared 18,000 times on Facebook. People are calling you an inspiration across dozens of platforms." But it was the phone calls that truly revealed the segment's impact. Garden centers from California to Maine contacted Liz requesting interviews about her techniques. Seed companies inquired about endorsement opportunities. 3 literary agents called to discuss book possibilities. A speakers bureau offered to arrange lectures at gardening conferences and retirement communities. "I'm 73 years old," Liz protested when Elena enthusiastically described the speaking opportunities. "I've never given a public lecture in my life." "You just spoke to 2-3 million people on national television," Elena replied with the logic of someone who'd witnessed impossible transformations become routine. "I think you can handle a few hundred gardening enthusiasts." Tommy Rodriguez arrived with reports that his seed supply had been depleted by customers requesting Elizabeth Thompson varieties. Cherokee Purple tomato seeds had sold out completely. Dragon tongue beans commanded waiting lists. Glass gem corn sparked conversations about heirloom variety preservation among customers who'd never considered genetic diversity important. "You've created a movement," Tommy announced with barely contained excitement. "People aren't just buying seeds. They're asking questions about soil chemistry, companion planting, sustainable growing practices. You've made scientific gardening accessible to ordinary people." Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield's assessment carried the weight of academic authority. "Elizabeth, your segment accomplished something remarkable. It demonstrated that horticultural excellence isn't exclusive to young professionals or lifelong experts. You've proven that passion and dedication can produce extraordinary results, regardless of age or experience level." The most unexpected response came from Rosa Martinez, who appeared at Liz's door 3 days after the broadcast with an expression that suggested internal struggle between competitive pride and genuine admiration. "Elizabeth," Rosa began carefully, "I owe you an apology. My behavior during the filming was unworthy." Watching the segment made me realize that I've been viewing gardening as territory to be protected rather than knowledge to be shared. The admission carried the weight of someone confronting uncomfortable truths about their own motivations. Rosa continued with visible effort at honesty. Your success threatened my sense of identity in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. I've defined myself through gardening dominance for so long that I forgot gardening should be about growth, not just for plants, but for people. Liz accepted the apology with the grace of someone who'd learned that victory meant more than winning. Competitions. Rosa, your expertise helped establish the standards that made my achievements meaningful. Competition doesn't require enemies. It requires people committed to excellence pushing each other toward better results. The conversation evolved into collaboration that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Rosa proposed establishing a community garden specifically designed for older adults interested in pursuing serious horticulture. Her generational expertise combined with Liz's fresh perspective could create educational opportunities that served their aging community while preserving traditional growing knowledge. We could call it the second season garden, Rosa suggested with enthusiasm that transformed her competitive nature into collaborative energy. A place where people discover that their most productive growing years might still be ahead of them. 6 months after the Food Network segment aired, Liz stood in the center of that community garden, surrounded by raised beds where 23 residents over age 65 grew vegetables that ranged from traditional varieties to exotic heirlooms that challenged every assumption about appropriate retirement activities. The second season garden had become a pilgrimage destination for gardening enthusiasts and aging advocates alike. Universities sent students to study their adaptive growing techniques. Retirement communities requested consultation about establishing similar programs. The AARP featured their model in a magazine article about reinventing retirement through passion projects. Michael and Sarah's quarterly visits had evolved into working vacations where they contributed labor to garden expansion, while their children learned plant identification and soil chemistry from their grandmother, who'd become their role model for refusing to accept limitations. Grandma Liz, their 8-year-old grandson, announced during a seed-starting session, "When I grow up, I want to be like you and start something amazing when I'm old." The comment crystallized the broader impact of her journey. Liz hadn't just transformed her own life. She'd challenged cultural narratives about aging, capability, and the timeline for personal achievement. Her story gave permission for people to pursue dreams they'd assumed were time expired. Elena documented the garden's first anniversary with the thoroughness of someone recording historical achievement. The community that had grown around Liz's initial Cherokee Purple seeds included master gardeners, former executives, retired teachers, and widowed spouses who'd discovered that loss could be transformed into growth. Dorothy Whitfield, now serving as the garden's official botanical consultant, provided the perspective that captured their collective achievement. What Elizabeth began with 8 tomato seeds has evolved into something unprecedented, a community where age is an asset rather than a limitation, where experience combines with experimentation to produce results that neither could achieve alone. The speaking engagement requests continued arriving weekly. Liz had accepted invitations to address gardening conferences, retirement planning seminars, and university programs studying successful aging. Her message remained consistent. Passion could emerge at any age, excellence could be achieved through dedication regardless of previous experience, and the most extraordinary growth often began with the smallest acts of courage. Standing in her original garden as autumn light painted the Cherokee purples that had started everything, Liz reflected on a transformation that exceeded every possibility she'd imagined when grief first drove her into the soil. The vegetables hanging from those initial plants represented more than successful cultivation. They were proof that dreams deferred weren't dreams denied, that potential could remain dormant for decades before blooming into extraordinary achievement. The phone rang with another interview request from a magazine writing about late-life career changes. Elena would handle the scheduling, Rosa would provide technical consultation, and Tommy would supply whatever specialized growing materials their expanding educational programs required. But tonight, Liz simply walked among plants that had taught her the most important lesson of her 74 years. It was never too late to plant new seeds, in soil or in life. And with proper care and patience, the most unlikely gardens could produce harvests that nourished not just the gardener, but entire communities hungry for proof that extraordinary possibilities remained available at any age. The Cherokee Purple swayed in the evening breeze, their deep purple shoulders catching the last light of day. While somewhere across the country, inspired viewers were planning their own first gardens and discovering that the most profound transformations often began with the simple act of pressing seeds into soil and trusting in tomorrow's sun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.